They will tell you it never happened, that no such boy ever lived, but in 1867, in the cold farmlands of Ohio, a child was born who science could not explain. His name was Timothy Caldwell, and the moment he touched another human being, something impossible happened. Secrets spilled, sins surfaced, every hidden thought, every betrayal, every fear you buried deep inside yourself, he spoke aloud as if he had lived it with you. Men collapsed in terror at his touch. Preachers cursed his name, judges demanded his silence, and within months the whispers spread. This boy was not a miracle, he was a threat. Doctors studied him, priests condemned him, strangers in black coats arrived with sealed orders and questions no farmer should ever hear. They didn't come to heal Timothy, they came to erase him, because one boy, one child, could strip away the illusion that holds this entire world together. History says Timothy Caldwell never existed, but his journals remain, his warnings echo, and the truth is simple. The boy they buried was not just a boy. He was a mirror, a doorway, a fracture in the system of control, and if you're watching this right now, then that doorway has just opened for you. They buried the truth beneath coal dust, sealed it in archives, and swore it would never be spoken again. But history has a way of bleeding through the cracks. Tonight you will hear what only a handful of men once dared to whisper: the story of Timothy Caldwell, an 8-year-old boy born in 1867 Ohio, a child science could not explain and perhaps never wanted to. Imagine this, a farmhouse on the edge of winter, smoke rising from the chimney, frost etched into the windows. Inside, a boy sits at the table. He looks ordinary, fragile, even sandy hair, pale skin, eyes too green to belong in that era. Yet the moment he reaches for another's hand, something happens, not imagination, not superstition, something that left seasoned doctors speechless, priests trembling, and one physician, Dr. Edmund Blackthorne, haunted for the rest of his life. Timothy was not like other children. He didn't just see the world, he felt it in ways that defied biology. When his skin brushed against yours, it was as if your soul had been unlocked, stripped bare. He could describe memories you never told, fears you buried, sins you prayed no one would know. People began to avoid him, afraid of what he might reveal, and yet others were drawn, convinced the boy was chosen, a prophet, or something far darker. Think about the time period, America, 1867. The Civil War had ended only 2 years before. The nation was fractured. Broken men returned from battlefields carrying wounds that medicine couldn't heal. Psychology didn't yet exist. Words like trauma, subconscious, memory, they were not part of common knowledge. And yet, this boy was living proof that the mind was more than flesh and bone. He revealed things no one had language for. He became the crack in reality itself. Dr. Blackthorne wrote that Timothy was both the purest child and the most dangerous mind I ever encountered. He spent years chronicling his observations, but his journals were sealed, hidden away by institutions that feared what they contained. Why? Because Timothy Caldwell wasn't just a curiosity. He was a threat, a living reminder that human consciousness was far more powerful and far more uncontrollable than those in power could ever allow. This story is not just about a boy. It is about you. Because once you hear what Timothy revealed, once you feel the weight of his existence, you will never look at yourself or the forces that govern you the same way again. Dr. Edmund Blackthorne first met Timothy in the winter of 1867. The Caldwell family had begged him to come. Their son was not sick in the body, but something was happening that terrified the entire community. Blackthorne, a physician hardened by battlefield carnage, thought he had seen everything: amputations without anesthesia, fevers that burned through soldiers in hours, men raving from infections that ate at the brain. Yet nothing prepared him for the stillness of Timothy. The boy did not fidget. He did not blink rapidly like other children. Instead, he fixed his gaze on the doctor with an intensity that made Blackthorne feel as though he had been dragged into another man's dream. And then, when Timothy reached for his hand, the dream became unbearable. The boy began describing things he could not know, the exact words Blackthorne had whispered to a dying soldier on the fields of Antietam. The face of a woman he had loved and lost to fever, even the guilt, the quiet, poisonous guilt that he had survived when better men had not. Blackthorne wrote, "The boy's words hollowed me. It was as though my very marrow had been spoken aloud." What Timothy revealed was not trickery. It wasn't guessing. It was something raw, invasive, merciless. He had no hesitation, no sense of restraint. He looked into you and brought forth everything you had tried to bury. And the deeper he went, the colder his voice became, like he was not speaking as a child, but as something ancient wearing a child's face. By the end of that first meeting, Blackthorne left shaken. He confessed in his private journal that he considered never returning. But curiosity is its own kind of possession. He could not resist the pull of Timothy Caldwell. He believed he had found something that could not be measured in medicine or philosophy. He believed he was staring into the next frontier of human knowledge, a frontier too dangerous to ever be mapped. The town of Caldwell Hollow soon became a place of whispers. Women crossing the market made the sign of the cross when Timothy passed. Farmers stopped sending their children to play near the Caldwell home. Even the pastor of the local church began speaking in hushed tones about unnatural forces hiding in plain sight. But fear, you see, always has a twin fascination. Not everyone shunned the boy, some sought him out. Traveling preachers claimed he was touched by God, that his gift was divine revelation. They would place their trembling hands in his, waiting for a blessing. What they received was no comfort. Timothy spoke back truths they had hidden, doubts about heaven, affairs of the flesh, secret sins long buried. One preacher collapsed into tears, clawing at his own chest. Another fled into the night, convinced the boy had stolen his soul. Then came the scholars, men who cloaked themselves in science yet longed for forbidden proof. They wrote reports, carefully worded and deliberately vague, for they feared to say openly what they witnessed. But between the lines, their meaning was clear. Timothy Caldwell had torn a hole in the wall of reality, a child who could touch your skin and make the invisible visible. The Caldwell family themselves lived in torment. His father considered sending him away. His mother clung to him in both fear and love, certain that whatever he was still her son. But deep down, they both knew Timothy's gift was not meant for comfort. It was meant to unravel, and once a soul was unraveled by him, it could never be stitched back together again. By the winter of 1868, Dr. Blackthorne had crossed a line. He was no longer a physician, no longer an observer. He had become a disciple of the boy. He brought strangers into the Caldwell home, miners, laborers, widows, even veterans broken by the war. Each one trembled when Timothy spoke, for he did not simply echo memories, he revealed futures. One miner remembers Timothy touching his arm and whispering, "The cave will eat you. The earth will swallow you whole." Days later, the mine collapsed. His body was never recovered. The town called it coincidence. Blackthorne called it prophecy, and the Caldwell family called it a curse. The boy's laughter vanished. His speech became slower, heavier, as though some other cadence had taken root within him. Blackthorne described it chillingly. His mouth forms the words, but the voice is not his own. It is older. It is colder. At times, Timothy spoke in languages the doctor could not trace, guttural sounds, sharp syllables that rattled like stones. His mother said she sometimes found him at night, barefoot in the fields, staring toward the horizon with unblinking eyes. It was as if Timothy was less a boy and more a vessel emptied out, waiting for something vast and nameless to pour into him. Blackthorne began to suspect that Timothy's gift was not his own at all, but the beginning of an invasion. By 1869, Timothy Caldwell was no longer just a curiosity. He had become a magnet for power. Businessmen, judges, and clergymen traveled discreetly to the farmhouse, not to cure him, but to use him. Imagine what it meant: a boy who could unravel every lie, expose every weakness, predict every turn of fate. To sit with him was to risk your soul, but also to glimpse a forbidden advantage. Some men left the house pale, trembling, swearing never to return, yet they always did. Addiction is not only to pleasure, it is to truth. Timothy had become the most dangerous mirror in Ohio. He stripped every man bare, and men, especially those who command others, cannot resist staring into the abyss of themselves. But the boy himself was withering. His skin grew paler, his nights more restless. He muttered words in his sleep, some in English, some in tongues not spoken by mortals. He often woke standing outside, his eyes locked on the stars. Blackthorn wrote, "I fear he is being hollowed. Something prepares him for its arrival." This was no longer about a gifted child. It was about the boundaries of the human mind, boundaries Timothy had shattered. And in that shattering, he became living proof of what institutions have always feared: that consciousness is not limited by flesh, that the mind is not yours alone, and that forces older than nations are always searching for vessels. By the turn of 1870, the Caldwell farmhouse had become something more than a home. It was a shrine, a courtroom, a confessional. Men who ruled over towns and industries walked its wooden floors with trembling knees. Women whispered prayers before daring to touch the boy's hand, and Dr. Blackthorn, once a man of medicine, had become its scribe, filling journal after journal with details so damning they would later be locked away. But Timothy was no longer an innocent participant. He had begun to understand the effect he had. He did not smile nor play like other boys. He spoke only when asked, and when he spoke, silence swallowed the room. One woman remembered his words as a scalpel made of sound, cutting away the skin of the soul. He revealed what you feared to admit, and once you heard him speak it, you could never pretend again. The gatherings grew secretive. Blackthorn described meetings by candlelight, where businessmen whispered of using Timothy to secure advantage over rivals, where preachers, stripped of their own faith by his revelations, still returned, hungry for the forbidden certainty he gave. Some left with tears, others with rage, but all returned. The boy had become an addiction and an infection, and yet the journals record something even darker. Timothy began predicting not only deaths, but changes. He would touch a man's hand and whisper of betrayals not yet committed, schemes not yet conceived. Days, weeks, sometimes months later, they unfolded exactly as foretold. Not the future, but the manipulation of it. Blackthorn wrote in despair, "It is as though he speaks from the other side of the veil, not seeing the future, but commanding it." The whispers spread beyond Ohio. By 1871, men of higher standing began arriving quietly by carriage: senators, wealthy industrialists, even military officers. They did not announce their visits. They came cloaked, guarded, as if fearing exposure. What they sought was not the boy himself, but the weapon hidden inside him. Imagine the temptation: a world still raw from civil war. Railroads carving the land, fortunes being built and destroyed, power hanging on secrets and alliances, and here was a child who could see through masks, strip a man's defenses bare, and expose the truth he wished never to face. To control such a child would be to control every man in your circle, but Timothy was not theirs to control. He did not bend to their demands. If he spoke, it was on his terms. If he touched, it was by his choosing. This defiance only deepened their hunger. They could not command him, but they could circle him, study him, wait for an opening. The Caldwell family, caught in this tightening web, grew desperate. Threats began to appear. Notes nailed to their door, livestock slaughtered in the night. Neighbors muttered that if the boy would not be taken by church or state, then perhaps he should be claimed by the grave. Blackthorn wrote that Timothy himself seemed unfazed. When asked if he feared the anger building around him, the boy replied coldly, "Fear belongs to them, not me." It was the kind of answer that chilled the doctor, for it carried not the voice of a child, but of something far older. By the winter of 1872, something had shifted. Blackthorne noted it in a single chilling phrase: "The boy no longer sleeps alone." Timothy had begun to speak in the night. His voice, low and steady, seemed like conversation. His mother claimed she heard him whispering to someone or something, though no one else was in the room. She swore she once saw shadows flicker on the wall that did not match the candlelight, as if a presence had entered. And when Timothy woke, he spoke with knowledge no child could possess. He recited lines from texts he had never read. He described places he had never seen. He whispered details of ancient rites, forgotten empires, and symbols that later scholars would claim aligned with forbidden traditions. The transformation was undeniable. He was not growing into a man. He was being carved into a vessel. Blackthorne admitted in his notes that he began to dread what might one day step fully into him. Worse still, Timothy himself began to anticipate the visits of powerful men. He would stand at the window before their carriages arrived, waiting. He would whisper their secrets before they entered the room. It was as though his gift had expanded beyond touch. Now the mere presence of a soul was enough to strip it bare. And so, the line between boy and oracle blurred. Those who came to him left, convinced they had glimpsed the machinery of fate itself. But to the Caldwell family, he was no longer their son. He was something else, something borrowed. In 1873, the first attempt was made to remove Timothy from his family. Blackthorne recorded how two men, claiming to be representatives of a scientific society in Pittsburgh, arrived at the farmhouse with promises of study and care. But their eyes betrayed them. These were not scientists, they were hunters. They sought to take the boy, to lock him away where his gift could be exploited in silence. The Caldwells refused. Days later, a fire broke out in their barn. Weeks after, Timothy's father was attacked on the road, beaten nearly to death. The message was clear: give up the boy or lose everything. Yet Timothy himself showed no fear. When Blackthorne asked him what he thought of the men who wanted him, Timothy replied with chilling calm, "They think they want me, but when they take me, I will take them." That sentence haunted the doctor. He began to wonder, was Timothy merely a victim, or was he playing a role in something larger, something he understood far more than they did? By now, Blackthorne's journals were filled not with the language of science, but of scripture and dread. He no longer wrote as a physician, but as a witness to a revelation too dangerous to survive. And he feared, above all, that others, men with power and no conscience, would seize the boy and bend him into a weapon against the world itself. By 1874, Timothy Caldwell was no longer a secret. He had become a shadow whispered about in private circles. A senator in Washington allegedly called him the child that could end a man's career with a touch. Industrialists referred to him as the Oracle of Ohio. And in secret churches, where men gathered to pray for power, his name was invoked like a forbidden prayer. But within the farmhouse, reality was darker still. Timothy's body weakened even as his presence grew unbearable. His skin was pale, his eyes ringed with shadows. He rarely ate, rarely spoke, yet when he did, his words struck like thunder. He predicted floods, deaths, betrayals, all with unerring accuracy. And each time, Blackthorne recorded, his voice carried a tone not of prediction, but of command. It was no longer that he saw what would happen. It was that he willed it to be, and this terrified even the most powerful men, because if Timothy Caldwell was not merely a window into the human mind, but a lever upon which destiny itself could turn, then he was more than a boy. He was a threat to the order of the world. Blackthorne's final entry of that year read, "The boy is not a miracle. He is not a curse. He is a doorway, and something waits on the other side." In the summer of 1875, the Caldwell farmhouse ceased to be a home. It had become a battleground of forces unseen. Timothy's parents could no longer protect him, not from the neighbors, not from the church, not from the men who came cloaked in power. Each faction claimed him, a prophet, a heretic, a weapon, a miracle. But Timothy himself, he belonged to none. Dr. Blackthorne described the change in chilling detail. Timothy's presence grew heavier, rooms felt smaller when he entered. Men accustomed to commanding armies or building empires suddenly found themselves silent in front of a boy of 8. Blackthorne wrote, "He does not ask, he does not plead, he simply looks and they crumble." Timothy's gaze was not cruelty, it was certainty. He knew what you had done, what you would do, what you feared most. No mask survived his sight, and for powerful men, masks are everything. But Blackthorne began to notice something else, something more terrifying than prophecy or truth. Telling. Timothy's words were starting to shape reality itself. He did not just speak of what would come. His voice bent outcomes. A merchant who touched Timothy and was told, "Your fortune will collapse," soon found his ships lost at sea. A soldier told, "Your blood will stain the soil again," was later killed in a meaningless skirmish. Coincidence? Blackthorne didn't believe in coincidence anymore. He believed the boy was rewriting the script of destiny, sentence by sentence. By 1876, whispers of Timothy had spread into hidden societies. Groups that cloaked themselves in ritual and secrecy began sending envoys to the Caldwell home, not out of curiosity but recruitment. One such group, Blackthorne recorded, attempted to initiate Timothy into their circle. They arrived cloaked in robes, carrying books of symbols, speaking in tongues borrowed from older ages. But when they placed their hands on Timothy, expecting revelation, it was he who unmasked them. He spoke their oaths aloud before they were sworn. He revealed the crimes they thought buried. He mocked their rituals, telling them they had borrowed fragments of something older, something truer, something they were not worthy to invoke. They left in shame, swearing revenge. From that day, Timothy was no longer hunted only by churches and governments. He was marked by secret orders, orders that understood what he represented. Not a prophet, not a prodigy, but access. Access to knowledge meant to remain hidden, guarded for centuries, parceled out only to those deemed worthy by the elite. Timothy had become a trespasser in their world, a child with the key to every locked chamber of the human spirit. And trespassers, in their eyes, do not live long. Dr. Blackthorne's journals from this year take a darker turn. He begins to question whether he is recording history or bearing witness to something not meant for mankind. His handwriting trembles on the page. His words drift from science to scripture, then to madness. He describes Timothy not as a boy, but as a conduit of invasion. He writes of nights when the child's voice seemed to echo, layered with tones not his own. Of times when the boy spoke truths Blackthorne himself had never dared admit aloud. "It is as if he sees through me," he confessed, "and when he does, I feel less myself, as though something else begins to speak through my own mouth after." This is where the story becomes unbearable, for Blackthorne was not simply observing anymore. He was changing. Timothy's presence infected him. He dreamed of voices, woke with phrases carved into his memory, symbols he could not draw fast enough before they faded. He admitted he feared sleep, for sleep had become another chamber of revelation, and still he returned, still he wrote, still he documented the unraveling of a boy who was no longer a boy, and a doctor who was no longer a man of science. Both of them had stepped too close to the fire. Both were burning. By 1877, Timothy's health collapsed. His body thinned, his skin almost translucent, his appetite vanished. And yet, even as the boy's flesh weakened, his presence grew unbearable. People described standing in the same room with him as drowning without water. He consumed you without touching. His mother begged Blackthorne to take him away, to bring him to hospitals, to let him die in peace if he must. But Blackthorne refused. He could not let go. His obsession had turned to worship. He wrote, "If the boy dies, the doorway closes, and I will be damned before I let the doorway shut." Timothy began speaking less frequently, but when he did, His words were carved in iron. He no longer described memories. He no longer revealed simple truths. He spoke of structures vast and unseen that governed mankind. He spoke of institutions that pretended to serve but in truth enslaved. He whispered of churches built not to free souls, but to bind them, governments not to protect men, but to sort and cage them. Blackthorn confessed that he did not fully understand, but he felt the weight of what the boy said. And so do you, hearing it now, because you have always felt it too, haven't you? That gnawing sense that the world is not what it seems, that you are being guided, manipulated, watched. Timothy Caldwell did not discover this. He revealed it, and the world tried to bury him for it. The final entries of 1867 contain one of the most disturbing events ever recorded in Blackthorn's journals. He describes a night when Timothy, frail and ghost-like, asked him to sit close. The boy reached out, touched the doctor's wrist, and whispered, "You are not recording me, I am recording you." Blackthorn claimed his vision blurred, the farmhouse vanished. He saw instead a vast black expanse, stars that burned too close, and a presence immense, ancient, waiting. It was not Timothy who spoke then, but something through him, something that had borrowed the boy's body the way a man wears a coat. "We have always been here," it said. "You are the experiment, and he is the doorway." Blackthorn collapsed to the floor. When he awoke, Timothy was staring at him, his eyes hollow, his lips trembling. For the first time, the boy seemed afraid of himself. From that night on, Timothy spoke less. Blackthorn, however, wrote more frantic pages, wild sketches, confessions of terror and awe. He admitted he no longer knew where the boy ended and where the force inside him began. And in that confusion, a question emerged, one Blackthorn never dared to answer. Was Timothy Caldwell science could not explain? Or a shadow humanity was never meant to face? In early 1878, Timothy's world grew smaller. The farmhouse windows were shuttered, the doors barred at night, for strangers no longer knocked, they broke. His father stood watch with a rifle, his mother wept quietly in the kitchen, and Dr. Blackthorn, now more prisoner than guest, filled page after page with warnings no one would read for a century. The boy's condition worsened. His body seemed frail, his ribs visible, his eyes darkened into hollows. But his presence had become unbearable. Blackthorn wrote, "When he enters a room, all breath leaves it. When his eyes meet yours, you feel as though you are unraveling, not in body, but in essence." Timothy no longer needed touch to reveal you. He spoke your fears before you opened your mouth. He whispered your betrayals while you still clung to silence. And at times, he described not only who you were, but who you would be if you continued down the path you walked. This was not prophecy. This was judgment. The boy had become both mirror and executioner, and yet, through his exhaustion, through his decay, Timothy Caldwell radiated something darker, inevitability. As if what spoke through him had already decided the outcome of the world, and humanity was merely catching up. By the summer of that year, Timothy began describing things no one around him could understand. He spoke of chains in the air, voices in stone towers, and a net cast over men's minds. These were not metaphors. They were fragments of truths pulled from somewhere beyond. Blackthorn began connecting them. He wrote that Timothy was describing systems, control systems, invisible forces that ruled men more powerfully than swords or guns ever could. Churches that bound faith into obedience, schools that shaped boys into soldiers, governments that promised freedom while tightening chains. And then came the most chilling line of all. Timothy whispered to Blackthorn one evening, "They will hide this knowledge, they will bury me, and they will bury you." That single sentence would prove prophetic. For even as the boy spoke, movements were already stirring, not to protect him, not to heal him, but to erase him. Because if the world ever accepted what Timothy Caldwell revealed, the institutions built upon illusion would collapse overnight. By 1879, Blackthorn's journals had shifted entirely, no longer medical notes, no longer curious observation. They had become warnings, frantic, fevered, but precise. He wrote that Timothy was being claimed by something vast, something that used him not to predict, but to expose. And yet, exposure is dangerous. When Timothy revealed a man's hidden crime, others trembled. When he exposed a preacher's secret sin, the church grew angry. When he whispered the private betrayals of a judge, the law itself turned against him. The boy was not simply unraveling individuals, he was unraveling systems. He stripped away the masks of authority, and in doing so, revealed how fragile power truly was. Blackthorne feared this more than anything, not because he doubted Timothy, but because he knew the world would not allow such a boy to live. He wrote, "Every institution survives on the lie of control, and Timothy Caldwell is proof that no chain is unbreakable." The question was not whether Timothy would be silenced. The question was how. This is the moment where you must pause. Yes, you, watching this now, ask yourself, why are you hearing this story? Why did it survive when so many sought to erase it? Why does it strike something inside you, something you cannot dismiss? Because the truth is simple. You are not here to be entertained. You are here to be marked. Timothy Caldwell's story is not about the past. It is about you. Every man feels it. The sense that the world is not as it seems. That the thoughts in your head are not always your own. That your choices are not free, but guided, bent, shaped. Timothy's curse was that he could strip away the illusions. Your curse is that you can feel them pressing in on you even now. And this is where I ask you to prove you are not asleep. Leave a comment below with the words, "The doorway is within." Write it twice, not once, twice. Why? Because repetition is how identity locks into place. By writing it, you are declaring that you have crossed the threshold, that you are no longer the man who began this video. You are stepping into the knowledge they swore you would never see. Do it now. And then, continue. After 1880, Timothy's story grows fragmented. The journals become scattered, entire sections missing, as though pages were torn out by unseen hands. What remains paints a picture not of a boy, but of a figure slipping out of humanity altogether. Blackthorne describes nights when Timothy no longer spoke, but when objects in the room moved as though pulled by invisible strings. He recounts moments when visitors collapsed without being touched, claiming they felt their hearts crushed by the weight of an unseen hand. And then the strangest detail, Timothy sometimes referred to himself as we. Not "I will show you," but "we will show you." His mother begged the doctor to intervene. His father threatened to burn the journals. But Blackthorne would not, could not. He was too deep, too consumed, too bound, and so Timothy Caldwell became less a boy, more a phenomenon, a breach, a reminder that the mind is not a cage, and that what waits beyond the veil has always been watching, always searching for a doorway. And through him it had found one. In the early spring of 1881, Timothy vanished from the Caldwell farmhouse for 3 days. His father searched the fields, his mother prayed until her knees bled, and when the boy returned, it was not through the door. Blackthorne wrote that he simply appeared standing in the kitchen, as though he had been there the whole time, though his feet were bare and torn with cuts from miles of wilderness. Where had he gone? Timothy refused to answer. All he said was, "I have seen their chambers, I have heard their counsels, they are not what they pretend to be." The doctor pressed him. Who were they? What chambers? What counsels? But the boy's face went blank, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the walls. He began repeating only one line, "They watch from above and they feed from within." Blackthorne admitted for the first time that he feared not for Timothy's life, but for his own. Because whatever the boy had stumbled into during those 3 missing days, it had marked them all, and the attention of such forces is never idle. Rumors spread. Locals whispered that the boy had become possessed, that demons wore his skin. Others said he had wandered into the ruins of the old mines and returned with the voice of the earth inside him. But one rumor was different, one whispered by men who arrived in black coaches, their accents not of Ohio or Pennsylvania, but older, sharper. They spoke quietly to judges, to sheriffs, to churchmen. They asked for records, they asked for journals, and they asked for the boy. The Caldwells refused, But resistance has a cost. Livestock began dying. Fields withered. Neighbors grew hostile, spitting curses at the family they once pitied. It was as if an invisible decree had gone out. Timothy Caldwell was to be erased, not by fire or rope, but by turning the world itself against him. Blackthorne realized what few dared admit: the boy was not only dangerous to institutions, he was dangerous to the illusion of order itself, because once a man realizes that power is built on lies, he cannot be controlled again. And if one child could strip that lie away, then the entire edifice of society stood on the edge of collapse. By late 1881, Timothy's presence had grown unbearable even to his own family. His father, hardened by war and toil, could not meet his son's gaze without breaking into sweat and trembling. His mother, once tender, avoided touching him at all, whispering prayers when he entered the room. Blackthorne wrote, "The boy is no longer their son. He has become a living indictment not of them, but of everything they have believed about the world." One night during a storm, Timothy's father tried to drive him out. He dragged the boy by the arm to the barn, shouting that no child of his would bring ruin upon the house, but Timothy did not resist. He only whispered, "It is not me you fear, it is the truth inside me." The father froze, his grip loosened, and he never touched the boy again. What terrified him was not Timothy's words, but the fact that every one of them rang true. That deep down he knew he was not afraid of his son, but of what his son revealed about himself. And so the machinery moved, the black coaches returned, strangers carried sealed orders, judges signed documents in back rooms. Timothy Caldwell was to be transferred for study, though no official records describe where. His family protested, but their voices were drowned beneath the weight of authority. On a winter night in 1882, Timothy was taken. Blackthorne's final account describes the scene: lanterns flickering against snow, men in long coats dragging the frail boy into a covered carriage. His mother's screams split the air. His father fired his rifle into the dark, but it was useless. The doctor swore he heard Timothy's voice as the carriage doors slammed shut, not pleading, not afraid, simply whispering, "You will never bury me, you will only bury yourselves." Those words haunt the journals. They are repeated again and again, as though Blackthorne feared the world would forget them. But forgetting was the very point. Timothy was gone, and history began its work not to record, but to erase. From this point forward, silence, no parish records, no census, no grave. Timothy Caldwell ceased to exist in every archive that should have remembered him. Blackthorne's journals themselves were sealed away in private collections, hidden behind false catalogs, guarded as though they contained not the story of a boy, but the blueprint of rebellion, and yet fragments survived. Hints in letters, cryptic references in church minutes, whispers in court testimony where judges abruptly silenced witnesses. Like smoke from a fire you are told does not burn, Timothy's existence refused to vanish completely. This is the pattern of all forbidden history. When truth threatens the order of things, it is not destroyed but drowned, papers burned, testimonies altered, names erased. And yet, if you listen, if you search, if you know where to look, the echoes remain. Timothy Caldwell became not a boy, not even a story, but a fracture, a crack in the wall of history itself. And through that crack, you can glimpse the machinery of control. You can see how far they will go to bury anything or anyone that dares to show you the chains you are already wearing. And that, more than his abilities, is why Timothy Caldwell had to vanish. In the years after Timothy's disappearance, the Caldwell farmhouse stood as a husk. Windows shattered, fields abandoned, the barn collapsed into rot. Locals claimed they saw lights within the ruins, flickering like lanterns, though no one lived there. Others swore they heard a child's voice in the night, whispering secrets that curdled their stomachs. But the official record, nothing. The Caldwells were scrubbed, Timothy's name absent, and yet Blackthorne's journals speak of men returning to the house, not to remember, but to cleanse. One entry scrawled in feverish haste reads, "They brought great trunks, iron-bound. They did not carry them out. They left them below. Whatever they placed beneath these floors was meant to drown him, but how can you drown the tide? It was not only the boy they buried. It was the knowledge he carried, perhaps in bones, perhaps in words, perhaps in something far less material. They did not destroy it, they entombed it, and that is worse, because what is buried is never gone. By the late 1880s, a strange pattern emerged. New institutions rose from the ashes of war: schools for the gifted, homes for the troubled, asylums for the unfit. Their stated purpose: to heal, to nurture, to protect. Their hidden purpose: to contain, to silence, to separate. Blackthorne warned that Timothy was only the beginning. He wrote, "They have seen what one child can do. They will not allow another to slip through. They will build systems not to reveal such children, but to cage them unseen." And look around you even now. The machinery remains. Classrooms that strip individuality. Clinics that drug the restless. Algorithms that track what you read, what you watch, what you think. Do you believe these systems evolved by chance? Or were they refined from lessons learned in that Ohio farmhouse when one boy showed them how fragile their chains truly were? Timothy Caldwell was not just erased, he was weaponized. His silence became the blueprint of control. And yet, every so often, a fracture appears. A child who knows too much. A soldier who sees too clearly. A man who feels the weight of the system pressing and refuses to bow. What happens to them? The record is always the same. They vanish, they relocate, they take their own lives. The file is sealed, the story forgotten, but listen closely. Doesn't the pattern feel familiar? Doesn't it echo the boy who vanished into the black carriage one winter night, never to return? This is the truth. Timothy did not die, not in the way you think. He became a template, a warning passed in whispers among those who keep the machinery running. If you find another like him, silence him before the crack becomes a flood. The boy became less a memory and more a protocol, and you are living inside its consequence. But here lies the twist they never wanted you to see. Erasure is never complete. No matter how many records are burned, no matter how many graves are unmarked, the echo lingers. Timothy's words were too sharp to dissolve. They will hide this knowledge, they will bury me, and they will bury you. Tell me, do you not feel buried even now? Buried in debts, in screens, in distractions? Buried in choices that never feel like your own? Buried beneath the weight of a world that tells you it is free, while binding you in invisible chains? Timothy's curse was sight, yours is blindness, and yet you are here, listening. You are proving that the machinery has cracks, that despite everything they built to contain the fire, a spark has reached you, and that is why his story matters, because if you hear it, you cannot unhear it. If you see the chains, you cannot pretend they are not there, and once you awaken, you cannot go back to sleep. In the final entry of Blackthorne's journals, written years after Timothy's disappearance, the doctor confesses something chilling. He admits that Timothy's voice never left him, that in dreams, in shadows, in half-lit corridors, he still hears the boy whispering truths that strip the world bare. He writes, "I once believed I had studied the child. I now believe the child studied me, for he knew what I would choose, what I would write, what I would preserve. He knew this day would come when the veil would lift and men would hear his name again." And then the final line, written with a trembling hand, "Timothy Caldwell is not gone. He is waiting, and when the world is ready, he will return not as a boy, but as a mirror." That is the heart of this story. Timothy Caldwell was never just a child in 1867. He was a doorway, a fracture, a mirror. He showed us what we fear most, not demons, not monsters, but ourselves, stripped of illusions, and now you have heard his name. You cannot unknow it, you cannot bury it. The only question is, when the mirror turns toward you, will you be ready to see what stares back? There comes a point in every forbidden story where history ends and the listener must choose. Timothy Caldwell's tale is not just a forgotten case from 1867. It is a map, a warning, and now a choice. You have followed his life into darkness. You have seen the way institutions silenced him, the way entire systems moved to erase a boy who saw too much. And if you feel unease in your chest, if you feel the weight of these words pressing into you, it is because you already know this is not only his story, It is yours, for every man carries chains, some of iron, most of thought, chains of doubt, chains of distraction, chains of obedience to forces that do not have his good at heart. Timothy revealed them in 1867. You feel them in 2025. The machinery has changed its shape, but not its function. The boy is gone, the truth remains, and it is staring directly at you. You see, Timothy was never the enemy. He was the crack in the wall, the glimpse behind the curtain, the voice that spoke aloud what others buried in silence. And that is why they had to erase him. But here is the truth no one will tell you. The machinery fears you more than it ever feared Timothy, because he was one boy. You are millions of men waking up step by step, realizing that the world they built around you is not a cage of steel, but of belief. Break belief, and the cage dissolves. Break illusion, and the chains fall away. This is why they drown you in noise. This is why your feeds, your screens, your endless scrolling exist to keep you from hearing the silence where the truth whispers. For in that silence, Timothy still speaks. He still waits, not as a boy, but as the voice of every man who refuses to sleep. And now that voice has reached you, so here we are at the threshold. You have walked the path. You have seen the boy science could not explain. You have felt the weight of his erasure and the echo that survived. Now ask yourself why this moment, why this story now? Because you were meant to hear it. Because chains only break when a man sees them for what they are. Because the rabbit hole does not end in stories of the past, but in choices made today. Timothy Caldwell was a mirror. He showed men who they truly were, and it terrified them. This video is another mirror. And now you must look, so decide, will you step back into distraction, bury this story like they buried him, or will you carry it, spread it, sharpen it into a weapon against the illusions built to bind you? Remember the words you wrote before, the doorway is within. If you truly believe it, leave it, for once a man sees the chains, he cannot remain a